Thank you for joining us this evening for our What I Wish I Knew About Getting Out of Debt and Staying There. This is our second in a series. I am Linda Pastore. I'm the Director of Development for KJZZ and KBOC Radio, so we're delighted to have you here tonight. I want to introduce very quickly Emilio Cabrera. He is in charge of our Group 91.5 and our business membership program, and he put this together for you this evening. So thank you, Emilio. On your seats are a brochure about sustaining membership to the station, so take a look at that. It tells you how you can get involved and support the station. And then if you have any questions, be sure and grab Emilio or myself following. We'll help you out. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight our sponsors for the evening, Wintrust Mortgage. Ward is in the back there. Wintrust Mortgage is dedicated to providing customers with a wide range of mortgage products to assist in the realization of home ownership. Ward, thank you tonight. Ward is going to be offering a free appraisal valued at $450 and a credit report free tonight, and that's valued at $35. So if you would like to have that, be sure and see Ward following. Thank you, Ward, for providing that. Rincon Ventures. Rincon Ventures is a full-service real estate and property management company serving the Valley and Tucson areas. They work with home sales for both owner-occupied and investors, renting home purchases, first-time home buyers, and investors. So thank you, Rincon Ventures. And our community partners tonight, these are resources here for you, and we want to encourage you to visit all the tables. Take Charge America. For 25 years, Take Charge America has been committed to helping people around the country improve their financial futures. They work with individuals and families facing a variety of financial challenges to help them achieve self-reliance, financial stability, and financial independence. And over here in this corner is our Money Management International. Money Management International is the largest nonprofit full-service credit counseling agency in the United States. Since 1958, they have been helping consumers find the tools and solutions they need to achieve financial freedom. So we want to welcome them as well tonight. And again, take some time following the presentation to visit their resource tables. We'll also be doing a drawing for an HD radio following this event, so be sure and stick around and see if your name is drawn. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator for this evening, KJZZ Senior Field Correspondent Nick Blumberg.
Thanks, Linda. Thank you all for being here. In just a moment, I'll introduce our panelists, but if you haven't done so, please make sure you put your cell phones on vibrate or silent. I'll be leading our panelists through a conversation for about an hour. That'll include some of the questions that you emailed to us ahead of time. If we don't get to your question, you'll be able to chat with our panelists and with our partners who are here after the formal part of the event wraps up. And as Linda said, please make sure you stick around. We will be giving away that HD radio. So now to introduce our panel. Angela Totman is Vice President of Pay Your Family First, which teaches financial literacy and practical money management skills. Angela's developed programs for teens and college-aged students and has been teaching financial literacy for more than 10 years. So welcome. Dawn McCraw owns Go Clean Credit. It's a consumer advocacy group that helps people restore their credit legally and permanently. She previously worked in the tech industry, and she's an expert in credit regulations and laws. Thanks for being with us. And Kelsa Dickey is the founder of Fiscal Fitness Phoenix. She calls herself a personal trainer for your money, and she's worked for more than a decade helping clients with their goals of paying off debt and saving money. So Kelsa, thanks for being with us. Well, Angela, I'd like to start with you if I could. When you're talking with folks, what are some of the most common causes of debt? What are some of the most frequent things that you hear?
Well, there are a lot of issues related to understanding money and financial education. Before I get into answering your question, I would like to say thank you to 91.5 and KJZZ for inviting us to be here, and thank you all for being here as well and taking your time to join us. Really, a lot of it comes down to understanding when you get into debt products, understanding what they are. From a higher level and a more holistic approach, though, a lot of times debt use comes out of not being able to afford the things that you want to buy. And most of us use debt to make major purchases, and debt's not always a bad thing. But when we use debt to provide maybe a lifestyle that we're not necessarily equipped to provide on our own with our current resources, we need to look at either expanding those resources or finding other ways to handle those things. So when it comes to getting into debt and maybe not even being able to get back out of it, it's really understanding what is the cause of it. Is it from living beyond what my current means are? Is it maybe I'm just not paying attention to how much money I'm spending or where it's going and where can I make those adjustments? But really the key is figuring out where you are now, because then you're empowered to make decisions that can provide you with a better future.
And Dawn, you work with folks helping them to restore their credit. Is debt the most common reason that people have issues with their credit in your work?
Yes. The short answer is yes. There's also a lot of issues with mortgages, but usually that's because when we went through the recession, of course, there were a lot of people that just got caught in the mortgages were very easy to get. Stated income was acceptable. People bought a lot more house maybe than they could afford. So if they lost their job or something changed in terms of income, if they had a commission-based kind of revenue coming in, then they got hit with that. So a lot of people, of course, went through the mortgage issues. So it was debt, credit card debt, unsecured, or mortgage issues is what we primarily see.
And Kelsa, what do you see in your work?
I think the biggest question that I field is, how do I tackle it? And a lot of people I find try to divide and conquer, which is this idea that if you pay $25 extra to all of your debt, that you'll conquer it. I actually think when it comes to money, divide and conquer doesn't work. You end up dividing your resources and not conquering anything. There's so much advice out there about which debt is best to pay first, whether you follow the snowball Dave Ramsey approach, which is the smallest balance first, the Susie Orman approach, which says you should do the highest interest rate first. And really my approach is that they're all right. So if you are just paying extra towards a debt, you're doing something right, but pick one and don't do a different debt until that debt is paid off. So some people will try one approach and they'll do that for a little while, and then they'll read a different article or they'll talk to a friend or a family member, and so they'll kind of jump ship and take a different approach. Don't let anything alter your approach until that one debt is gone. I just think that's really important. So instead of doing 25 extra to 5, just pay the minimum on all of them and pick one. And whether, like I said, whether it's the highest interest rate or the smallest balance, you're doing something right.
Well, do you think people can feel almost crippled by all the, especially if they have multiple areas in which they have debt that they need to pay off? Do they feel like they don't know where to start and therefore they don't really do anything or they don't do enough?
Yes, I think people get frozen by whether or not they're doing the right approach or the wrong approach. And when it comes to money, it's really quite often that there isn't a right or a wrong way. There's this whole gray area. And that's why if you just pick one and throw everything you have at it until that's gone, you'll start to feel progress and like you're conquering it.
I think the thing that is important to remember too is to celebrate when you do make that progress. I think, again, we feel overwhelmed and sometimes we set huge goals that are very overwhelming. So set the goals that you can celebrate little bits over time, because then that sense of accomplishment will help propel you towards the next goal that maybe is slightly bigger. It will help you tackle that next obstacle.
Well, and one of the things that we talked about earlier was the idea of good debt versus bad debt, things that it's worth it to get into debt for and things that it's not. So, Angela, I'd like to start with you, but obviously have the rest of you jump in on that as well.
Sure. So not all debt is created equal, obviously. There's debts that come with different interest rates, different types of debt products, and as a consumer, it's really important to understand what all of those are. But there's also a lot of people use debt and they leverage other people's money and resources to help them finance things that otherwise they wouldn't be able to. Or we consider good debt to be debt that's going to help create income for you. So if you're using debt to finance a business or you're using debt to finance an asset that you're then turning around and earning money off of, that would be good debt. If you're going out and using your credit card maybe to buy, $500 worth of new clothes, that would be bad debt, because ultimately, unless you're renting your clothes out or doing something with it, that's not debt earning money for you. That's not debt being leveraged in a way that's going to help you financially. We talk a lot about a college education under certain different circumstances. If you're financing that, statistics show that people with college degrees, they, over the long haul, earn significantly more and income. So choose good products, choose good loans, get your college degree, have a manageable amount of them, but again, another form of potentially good debt if you've managed it correctly.
Well, and I guess I'd like to add something to that. From a credit report and score perspective, we find a lot of people they're afraid to get into debt at all. They're afraid of credit cards. They just stop. And the negative aspect to that is that you have to use credit to build credit. And that means you will not have a credit score if you don't have an open revolving, meaning credit card, that you're using on a regular basis. And when I say using, I mean use it to buy gas. That's it. You don't have to charge it up. You just use it a little bit. You pay it off every month. That is going to, over time, establish excellent credit history for you. And that component of your score is going to have a huge impact. If you don't have that, your score is being repressed by quite a lot, because the way the FICO algorithm works, it is affecting many components of your score, just having that one open revolving card.
I agree.
So
I do not
be
think,
responsible with it.
Yeah. Credit cards are not evil.
Right.
So, you hear that a lot. I think it's sort of an unhealthy perspective. One of the strategies I like to employ is if you have a credit card and you don't trust yourself with it, don't keep it in your purse or don't even know the card number. Pick a bill that is fixed in the same every month and choose something small, maybe your gym membership for like $19.99. Have that automatically billed. And let's say it's billed on the 10th and your statement prints on the 12th of the month. Have an automatic payment from your checking account for the 17th of the month. So just a few days after your statement prints, you're not paying any interest, and yet you're keeping a very small balance on that, which will then report to the credit bureau. Mm-hmm. And your debt to income ratio won't be high. It's reporting a positive activity and that sort of thing. It's a really responsible way to use a credit and build credit without trusting yourself to not rack it up. Yeah. The other thing is really the goal with credit cards is just to be very intentional with them. So if you're being reactionary in your spending, really it has to do with your own motivation when you're using the card. So if you're using it because you know you don't have the money to pay cash for it that day, it's probably not a good move. Mm. If you are really intentional and you have money, you just want to put it on the card and then pay the card later out of your checking account, then I would say that is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and one of the things that I was curious, you talk about having these small amounts that you can be using to build up your credit score. Does carrying too high of a balance hurt your credit score?
So that's a little bit of a difficult question, because your credit score and your credit report is an exact snapshot in time. It's like taking a picture. On that day, if you are 100% maxed out on that credit card, when they take that picture, your score is going to be impacted quite a bit negatively, okay? If 2 weeks later, there's a snapshot that basically that balance is less than 10% of your credit limit, because that's kind of an optimal, that's what we should strive for, to pay it off or keep the balance at less than 10%, your score could go up 40 points. It's just that snapshot in time, literally. So, but payment history is hugely important. So just using it at least a few times a year so that you continue to have it activate your score and keep it being impacted.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Angela.
No, I was just going to reiterate, I think that Kelsa made such a great point when she said that credit cards and many forms of debt, it's not the debt, it's not the use of it, that they're not evil. I mean, we personally, in our household, we use one of our local home improvement store cards to finance major improvements on our house, because we can buy the supplies and we can finance it over 12, 18, 24 months interest free. But I know we're going to pay it off in that time. And so we're not going to pay the huge amounts of interest. So it goes back to, again, understanding your motivation on why you're doing it. Is it something you need? And understanding that there are uses and products of debt that are out there available that as a consumer we can get into and we can use and we can leverage to help improve our financial situation. It's just about understanding where they are and having the motivation to use them in their intended purpose.
Well, and sorry, just to add one thing to that. We have a lot of people that'll come in and say, well, I just use cash because that is fiscally responsible, and which is great. If you have enough money to buy a house for cash, buy a car for cash, never need credit, then use cash. The problem is most of us at some point in time need credit. And then you go to get that loan and then you find out, oh my gosh, my credit score doesn't even calculate. Or, why is it at a 540? Well, because you don't have any credit cards. FICO is a risk profile. It's a calculating how big of a risk you are. And when it says, there's no history. I don't know how they use revolving credit, which is the biggest indicator of risk, because you can max it out. You don't have any money to pay it off. Okay, that's risky. But I'm using it and I'm paying it down every month for 2 years. That's responsible. So it will calculate in your favor when it sees that. But if you're trying to go get a loan tomorrow, how do you build up 2 years of credit history? That's why it's important to begin the process, be responsible, and then demonstrate that in your credit report.
But if you do have that much cash that you don't need credit, we do birthday parties, we do all sorts of events. Let us know.
I wish I was in that. Yeah.
Angela, I'll start with you on this. This was a question that someone in the audience emailed. How much should I be saving versus using to pay off debt?
That is a good question. If there were a magic ratio or formula, it would make answering it a whole lot easier. But everybody's financial situation is different. And so you really have to look at individually what your situation is. Some experts will tell you that you should be saving at least 15% of your income every month. Other experts will tell you different amounts. The idea is pick a formula or pick a method that works well for you and, manage your interest. If you're paying a lot of interest, find a way to minimize that amount. Put yourself in a situation where you're making steps in the direction that you want to go. And if you can be paying down debt and saving at the same time, that's amazing. And you should celebrate that because a lot of people are not in that situation.
Yeah, so this is actually a question I'd love to answer because if you think about it, if you take everything you have out of your checking account today and you pay it towards a credit card, it feels really awesome. But what happens if your car breaks down tomorrow? You have to put the repair on your credit card. This is actually a vicious cycle that I feel like so many people are in, and the credit cards love to keep you in this. So I actually think I wrote down a couple of categories. Car repairs, home repairs, gifts, clothing, medical expenses, any annual bills you have that you only pay once a year, whether it's maybe a car insurance you pay semi-annually, a home warranty bill, something like that. Determine a monthly figure and put this into a savings account every month. Okay, and it can be $25 here and there. Do as much as you can. And I think this seems counterintuitive to a lot of people that I want you to save this money before you pay extra to a credit card. But I feel like this is crucial to actually getting ahead on your credit cards. So if you have this money and then you still have extra, that extra money can then go and pay towards the credit cards. If you don't do this, if you don't have a car repair fund or a gift fund or a clothing fund, those are things that are going to happen. And if you haven't planned for them, then that money will go back on your credit card. And I think there's this emotional roller coaster ride that happens, which is one pay period, you have some extra money, and so you pay maybe $200 extra to your credit card. You're excited, you feel motivated, you feel like you're getting ahead. And then 2 weeks later, which there's usually one pay period for everybody that's a little tighter than another person or than another check, money's really tight. And so food and gas, when you don't have enough, go back on the credit card. You feel discouraged and frustrated and disappointed with yourself, and you probably take ownership and blame of that, of why can't I do this right? And it's because we're missing this piece of it. So put a little bit of money in savings, and again, it doesn't have to be a lot. And then I think that way it'll prevent you from adding back to the credit card.
Well, and that sort of gets to the idea of when you're looking at maybe taking a step back and trying to prevent debt, trying to make sure you're not putting yourself in a situation where you're racking up a lot of debt, where you're putting your credit score at risk. How important is budgeting? How important is, as you use the word intention, managing your money intentionally? How much of that is something that people should be thinking about that they don't necessarily?
Yeah. If you look at your checking account, you see $400 in there, but you haven't saved for a car repair, you haven't saved for clothing, you haven't saved for a home repair bill, you don't really have $400 to spend. But nobody actually does the calculation in their head of, I should probably not spend all $400 in there. So it's really tempting to spend it. So that's why getting it out of your checking account shows you what's truly left. These expenses that I listed are the expenses that cause the most whammies because they don't happen every month, but when they happen really big. And so if you just put $25 away into a car repair fund every month, and when a car repair happens, even if you don't have all of it in the account to pay for the entire repair bill, chances are you're minimizing the impact that you have to feel in that month for the entire bill, okay? And that's why I think a budget is important because it helps you determine these values, even just a monthly average. So a lot of people say, I have no idea how much I spend on that stuff. The goal is not to be perfect. It's just to minimize this roller coaster ride of expenses that we all feel. Okay.
Right. And the other thing too is when you're putting together your budget, your savings being a line item on your budget. If you aren't necessarily, if you're not estimating, if you're maybe more meticulous or detailed about it, make sure that your savings has a line item on your budget. That way you know it's there. We don't call them budgets, we call them spending plans, because we need to have plans for our money, because if we don't plan for it, somebody else is probably going to try to, right? There's a lot of people who want a piece of what we have in our checking accounts or our savings accounts. So when you put together your budget, be sure that you have, our company name is Pay Your Family First. Pay yourself first. Give yourself the opportunity to have that emergency fund.
Dawn, I'm curious, your background before you worked in credit, you worked in business. Was there anything that you learned in the business world, any sort of techniques you learned that you've applied to personal finance?
Well, I think, yeah, that's an interesting question.
Thank you.
I think that the difference that I see is when you're in a corporate world, you've got a lot of resources. You have a lot of people around you with knowledge and expertise that you can go to. When you're, a consumer on your own, you're not surrounded with that. And you go on the internet and you get misinformation, some good information. How do you sort through it? It's very difficult. And you don't know who to go to. Is this a scam company? There's so many people that are afraid of that now after all the stuff that's happened. So I think that's the part where the consumers, it's a little scary. You don't know where to start. It's overwhelming. And where do you go? And the corporate world is a little comfortable, in that sense, because you can trust the people that you're getting advice from.
One of the things we've talked about was the idea of debt consolidation, debt forgiveness, debt management. What are these different things? They all sound really good. They all sound like something that would be a good thing to do if you're in a lot of debt. But what's the difference between these different approaches, and how do you advise people which one is best for them? Dawn, I'll start with you.
Wants to take that. Okay,
Go for it.
Okay, I'll just take it from my perspective, because a lot of the people that come to us, they're not, there's a different approach for when you are maxed out on credit cards, but it's still positive. So you're paying a lot for that credit score. I will tell you that much, because you're making the minimum payments. Your score's impacted because you're maxed out on those cards, and it will factor that into the calculation. But many times it's not worth it, because, and this is coming from a person who wants everybody to have a great credit score, but your credit can be turned around and you can overcome the debt. You have to get out from under it. So what I usually, and that's a different situation than someone that it's already been charged off. And now it's in collections. So consolidation, debt management, these are mechanisms really, and settlement, but these are mechanisms for when you have maxed out credit cards, but it's all still positive. If you want to try to do a settlement on a credit card, that will typically require you to, and now it becomes derogatory, because you're going to have to go late. If you want to try to pay 30% to 45% of that balance, you will have to go late to do it. They won't settle with you without that. But if you can do that, you want to try to settle it within 6 months, because 6 months, they will then charge it off. Sometimes they'll keep it, sometimes they'll sell it to collection agency. But if you can settle it before then, it will become just settled instead of charged off, which is more derogatory on your credit.
Also, what's your perspective on that?
So 10 years ago, I actually wrote a blog post that said debt settlement, debt consolidation is never the right answer. And I claim that I am wrong. I admit that I was wrong. With all of the clients that I've worked with, I stand here corrected that there are definitely some instances where it is absolutely the best solution for them. Right. And I don't do any of those, so it's my job to put them in touch with people that I've worked with, that I trust, and help them to make the right decision. So take all of the information. Information is power. What would this look like 6 months from now, 1 year from now, 18 months from now? How much will it cost you? What's the outcome that you can expect? And then let's see if we're comfortable with any of those.
And just one comment to add to that. We have someone in our office that just does debt negotiation. I'm not going to call it settlement. Debt settlement is typically those programs that are, all those companies pretty much got shut down, and they should have been in Arizona, where they would put you into a program, and it might take you 3 years to, you're paying and paying and paying. Meanwhile, you get a summons because the company that you're putting money into that account for has not been paid. Okay, that's debt settlement. Those are gone. That's usually 99% of the time not a good idea. Debt negotiation is basically saying, I will pay you this much to settle this account in full. It's settled for less than the full balance. That is often a good approach. And we do, and you can't say, well, let's fix our credit, and then you've got this mountain of debt. You've got to get out from under the debt, have some kind of settlement, then we can fix your credit. That's the sequence that it goes in.
The thing, too, is, again, to understand that whereas if you're consolidating your debt, you may be taking many lumps of money and putting it into one balance or one amount that you're going to pay on. And charge-offs or settlements or negotiation, that is a company saying, okay, you're not going to pay me the full amount. So, and I think that that's something that for consumers is oftentimes not clear. And that's why it's derogatory on your credit score, because the creditor that you're working with, they're accepting less than what you actually owed. And there's actually tax consequences sometimes involved with that too, because according to the IRS, that in most circumstances counts as income for you. And
just one point of a lot of confusion out there for people. We get this question all the time. They look at their credit report and they see Cap One charged this $5,000 off, so I don't owe it, right? Wrong. You absolutely owe it. Charging it off is an accounting mechanism inside that company. They move it from one ledger, the profit, to a loss. It's basically telling their stockholders, we're never going to collect that money. You still owe the money, and what they do with it can vary from continuing to report the balance on your credit and trying to collect, to selling it to a collection agency or assigning it to a collection agency, which will pop up another trade line on your credit for the collection. And then the original creditor, Cap One, should show a zero balance. But the balance just moves. It doesn't go away.
Much as we might want it to.
Much as you might want it to.
Well, while we've been on the subject of credit cards, I wanted to ask you, first of all, if you can explain what a secured credit card is and whether you think it's a good idea.
I think it's
Angela, do you want to start with that?
I was going to say. Well, there's different, so secured versus non-secured debt is basically, it's based on what you have available and how they're going to be able to have recourse against you if you choose not to pay it. And there are all types of debt. You can get secured loans or you could get non-secured loans. And basically the idea is, how committed are you to repaying it is the idea, because your interest rate is going to be affected by that. Basically the amount of commitment that you're showing and how you're going to back that debt is going to be impacted by the type of loan you get. Here's the idea though. When I pull out a credit card to use it, my intention is to pay it off at the end of the month. So hopefully as a consumer, when you're taking on debt, you have a plan for how you're going to approach it. And, ideally you wouldn't need to be in a situation where you're having to show collateral or have any additional recourse made available to you because of the way you use your credit cards.
Well, I would say, as I said earlier, if you do not have a credit card open and reporting on your credit, your score is being repressed because of that. In those cases, usually that person is not able to qualify for an unsecured card because it's primarily based on your credit score and income.
That's a good point.
Okay, so what I always recommend is to get a secured card. It's a good thing to do because it's going to allow you to establish your payment history. The downside is that in order to get a $500 credit limit, you have to deposit $500 into a savings account at that bank, and you won't get that money back for probably a year or two. And that's after perfect payment history. They're securing the right for you to have a credit card by that deposit. But then you have to use it as though that money doesn't even exist anymore. Okay? And pay it off. Never, ever be late on a secure card. They will shut that down immediately. They have no tolerance.
I think the point to make is that a secured card, while useful, is really for individuals who are considered high risk by creditors. And so if you use it to, like, following a bankruptcy to rebuild your credit or something like that, there's certainly a use there for it. I feel like the fees inside of a secured credit card are usually pretty high. There's monthly fees, annual fees, transaction fees sometime if you use it too much. So if you have a good credit history and you have a good score and you don't need a secured credit card, I don't recommend it. A regular unsecured credit card would work way better and be much cheaper. And
you really need to shop for that secure card. Don't just go down to the bank that you bank at and say, give me a secure card, because there are very few that, just like Kelsa said, they're usually pretty bad in terms of annual fees and all this. They're very expensive to have. But there are a few out there that are good. So do your homework before you open one.
One of the questions that more than a few people asked were about student loan debt. Best techniques for managing student loan debt, and is there a way to lower monthly payments? Kelsa, do you want to start?
Yes, I love this topic. I actually think student loans are probably going to be the next bubble, actually. I think they're being used like the credit cards used to be used. And this topic of good debt versus bad debt, I know a lot of people consider student loans good debt, and in some cases that's absolutely true. When it becomes a bad debt is when you accept the maximum amount that the school will give you and you allow it and you use it to live a certain lifestyle that you normally would not be able to afford. So if you are extremely intentional with the amount of the student loan you're using and still maybe working part-time while you're going to school to afford your gas in your car and that sort of thing, then I certainly think it could probably boost your income after you graduate and be an asset to you. I think they're giving out way too much in student loans compared to how much the schooling actually costs. And so there's teachers who are graduating from a 4.5-year degree with $130,000 in student loan debt, and it's going to be a huge hurdle to climb. So I think it's really important when you start thinking about student loans, what happens is they allow you a certain amount, they apply it to the tuition and books and that sort of thing, and then they send you a check. It's called a refund check for the difference of what was not used. And I'm telling you, some semesters it's $5,000 that they're handing these students and saying, here you go, here's $5,000, be responsible with this. And it's the best thing to do is just turn around and send it right back to your student loan and live for those 5 months using your income either from a part-time job or a full-time job while you're in school, keeping your expenses low and that sort of thing. So it's okay to use it for tuition and school fees. Try not to live off of them.
Like buy a car.
Yeah.
But they call it living expenses, Kelsa.
Yes,
Yeah,
I know.
it's the lifestyle.
I
could
okay
not
to
agree
live at
more with what Kelsa's saying. We are seeing so many clients who have defaulted on student loan debt, and there are, just to talk to you, what are the options? So the options, we actually work with a couple companies that help people in terms of refinancing their student loans. But I will tell you, just at the high level, consolidation is an option. However, typically they're just taking all let's say you defaulted on student loans, you're late, whatever. They just take all that money and they put it into one account, and all those derogatories will stay on your credit. So it really is not helping you from a credit score report point of view. There is a new program that just started January 1st that's called Pay As You Earn. Pay As You Earn is a student loan modification. There are certain income requirements for this. The good thing is, first of all, they will typically cut the payment in half. And when they create this new account with the new loan amount, and they are extending, by the way, just like a loan modification, they're extending the term. So it's stretching it out to make it more affordable. But they will remove all the derogatory reporting. And the other way to remove derogatory student loans that you've defaulted on or whatever is rehabilitation. You have to apply for it and you have to, request this. But if you have 9 months of on-time payments, they will also remove the derogatory reporting. So.
And I'd really love to echo something that Kelsa has said here. And that is, when you invest in college, it is an investment. It is an investment in you and your future. But you need to look at what the return on your investment is going to be, because she brought up a great example. If you have a teacher graduating with $100,000+ in student loans, that's going to be very difficult based on a starting income level. And even maybe after you've been a teacher for an extended period of time, it's going to be very difficult to repay that. So when you're looking at debt as a financing option for college, look at what your long-term planning is. What is your projected income? How are you going to be able to match your repayment with what your projected income is?
Yeah, someday they might actually give a student loan based on your major, but I don't see probably not anytime soon. Oh, you're going to be a doctor?
You can choose. There's the graduated repayment plan, which means it slowly goes up the more years outside, and it's usually on a 2-year scale. So every 2 years, the payment increases. There's IBR, which is income-based repayment. So you can choose that where it's based on your income. Just know that if all of a sudden you see a jump in your income, they request your statements and bank statements and that sort of thing.
Well, and those programs aren't necessarily available for all types of loans too. And that goes back to, again, understanding the type of debt product that you're using. Government loans, those rates are a lot of time going to be more favorable than private loans, well, depending on what the current interest rates are. But again, there are some lending situations and some loans that they're not necessarily going to allow you to have access to those income-based repayment options. And they're going to have less flexibility in what your income or your repayment options are.
Well, and pay-as-you-earn, it only will apply to federal student loans, and they will pull your tax returns every year to see if your ability to pay has, improved.
For parents who are thinking about doing like the Parent Plus loan for your children, if you ever read sort of the disclaimers on those student loans, there's like a 4% just loan origination fee. So literally the day you take out that loan, add 4% to the balance. And then there's still the interest rate that they charge every month. So if you have another avenue, if you've got savings or investments or something, it's probably cheaper to use that than to take out the student loan, because they're going to capitalize the interest on that 4% fee right from the beginning as well. So it's actually a really expensive loan usually.
Mm-hmm.
This was another question that someone from the audience emailed to us. I think it probably applies to a lot of people. This person wrote in, "My office closed during the financial downturn, leaving me unable to pay the mortgage, sending the property into foreclosure. My credit has started to rebound, but what suggestions do you have?" And Dawn, I'd like to start with you for improving a credit score with a big black mark on it with something like a foreclosure.
Yeah, it's difficult. Time heals all wounds. So, and as you guys probably know, it will eventually come off your credit. 7 years from the date of your first delinquency is when it will come off. But, a foreclosure, it will be the date of foreclosure. But the most important thing when you have negative credit is to balance that with positive credit. Okay, positive credit is important. Positive good credit with perfect on-time payments and a good history. If you're looking at score, first you need to check your credit report, because many foreclosures and short sales are reporting incorrectly. Make sure they're not updating them, continuing to mark them late. I had one today. The foreclosure was in 2009. They were late last month, and they have a $270,000 balance owed. So there's a lot of really messed up reporting. So that would be number one. But number two is to focus on the positive credit, and I would also say, just from a score point of view, authorized users, credit card authorized users, is a great way to improve your score without adding to any debt. So the way it works is, let's say your parents have excellent credit. They are never late, because if they're late, you're late if it's reporting on your credit. Okay, it's a little bit of a loophole in FICO, and essentially let's say your mom has a 20-year-old card with a $10,000 credit limit and perfect payment history. and keeps the balance 10% or less than the limit. That's a perfect card. If she calls the credit card company, adds you as an authorized user, has the card sent to her, cuts it up, you never have access to that account ever, okay? Your credit will not impact her credit ever. But on your credit report, it's going to calculate your score as though you've had a card for 20 years with perfect payment history. I've seen anywhere from 20 to 100 points from a really good authorized user. So it's just a score.
My husband,
mechanism,
who was born in 1981, has good credit history from like 1971 because he was, when he went to college, his parents gave him added him as an authorized user to a credit card. And so 10 years before he was born, he has great credit history.
And guess what? There is no reconciliation with a credit report. It doesn't even look at anything and say, wait a minute, how do you have credit history 10 years before you're born? It doesn't care. It just calculates what's reporting. That's it.
If you're a parent and you have your teen or somebody looking to buy a car and try to have some sort of I remember when I went to go buy my first car, I couldn't get a car loan because they said you have no credit. And I said, well, I've been banking here forever. And they said, we don't care. You have no credit. And then you get into this loop. Well, if I don't have any credit, but nobody will give me any credit, how do I get credit? And so a lot of times this is a tactic that we'll advise for parents that are looking to help their teens build credit and do it in a safe, responsible way. But
it can be for anyone. But now if that person that adds you as an authorized user all of a sudden goes late, or, you have to get them to remove you from it.
This was some information that I found on Pay Your Family First, the website for Angela's organization. I thought it was really striking. It says 26% of teens, just 26% understand credit card fees. 76% don't know if it's a good or bad idea to use a check cashing service. 32% of college students are not at all or not very well prepared to manage their finances. Angela, how important is it to start teaching financial literacy to young people? Do we do enough of that, and does that contribute to people having debt problems later down the road?
Well, if you have ever spoken with a child or had a child and they wanted to get something and you said, no, we're not going to do that right now, you probably understand why it is important to start teaching people very young the importance of financial education and financial responsibility. I grew up in a household where there were constantly financial stresses. It's one thing that I remember. And I recently read a statistic from some research by Halifax that said 90% of kids 9 to 15 know if their parents are stressing out about money. So even if you think you're protecting them from it, if you have things that you're going through in your life, your kids probably know about it. And so it's perfect to open up the conversation. Even if you are not where you feel comfortable, at least if you can open up the line of conversation so that your child or your teen, even as a young child, can feel important. It's not necessarily about telling them if you're way underwater that you're way underwater. It's about helping them understand the ins and outs of using money and the motivation behind how we use money. We live in a society of instant gratification. And so what our kids see, what teens have been seeing, is we can get what we want easily accessible. And now over the last few years, we see what the repercussions and the consequences of that are. So we need to help them understand how we got where we are today and how they cannot repeat it. Now, as parents, sometimes we don't feel equipped to do it, which is why it's important to demand financial education within our school systems and make it available from many different avenues. Because what happens is that we send these young people out into the real world and they don't understand how money works. Money is a life skill. You learned algebra, you learned how to read, you learned calculus. Some of us learn things that we're never going to use in our lifetime, and that's okay. But this is something that we use every day. I talk to middle schoolers and grade schoolers. They make decisions about money every day. It might be 50 cents in the vending machine, but they're making choices about money. We have to set young people up to be able to make responsible decisions and to make decisions that will set a foundation for them to be financially successful into their future.
There's this idea that financial literacy must be taught in schools, which I completely agree. But so much about how we spend our money has to do with what's important to us and our values, and that's really taught at home. So whether you tithe or not, for example, is a family decision, not something that should be taught in a textbook. It's one of those things where, how much do you spend on clothing versus material possessions worth maybe travel, for example, is important to some families. And that, I think, needs to be taught at home. The studies show that children start to learn about money from their parents at the age of 2. So it's very young, and it's usually just the observations. Are they seeing you pay with cash, or are they seeing you use a credit card or debit card? When you leave for work in the morning, are they hearing you say, oh, I have to go to work because I have to pay bills? That's an association with money that they're learning from a very young age. And if you just seriously Google financial lessons by age for children, there are so many resources out there and wonderful games you can play and tricks you can employ. Obviously, a 4-year-old does not need to learn about compound interest. So by age, it actually breaks down what goal you want them to learn that year. And for example, one of the tricks that I read, and I just thought this was genius, was when you first give a child a piggy bank, make sure it's clear. A clear piggy bank, they can see what's inside of it and they can see it grow. If it's not clear, all it is a noise machine, and they're just constantly shaking it, right? They don't really know that it's money inside of there. So make sure it's clear. And it's little teeny things like that. Giving a 5-year-old a purse when you go to the grocery store and sticking $1 in it, and making sure that she's learning how to safeguard money. And by the time she leaves the grocery store, she can spend it, but she has to learn how to hold on to that dollar herself, as opposed to you keeping it in your pocket or your purse. So really little simple things like that. And I just think, just Google that. It's really simple.
And Angela, I know that's a lot of what your organization does. You've sort of targeted these different things to people of different ages, right?
That's right. And Kelsa gave a lot of really great examples of things that you can do. And there is free online curriculum available from a lot of different places. The idea is to find what is age appropriate for your child, and then listen to them and the things that excite them. When we go to the store to buy a birthday present for one of our kids' friends, we set a budget. We say, here's how much that you can spend. Not only that, but we don't pay an allowance in our household, but we give our kids an opportunity to earn money doing other things. They have a pet sitting business. My boys have a pet sitting business. It all started when a neighbor asked them to come feed their cats. I have to tell you, the personal reward that they felt from going out and earning money on their own was tremendous. So listen to the things that excite your children, no matter what age they are. Listen to the things that are important to them, because that will allow you to connect with them on a deeper level and understand what their values are, understand what they want to know about money. This is an issue, especially for the teenage age group. Charles Schwab did a survey. 86% of kids said they would rather learn about money in a classroom or in a different environment than making mistakes on their own. Well, of course they would, because they've seen some of the rest of us and older generations make those mistakes and the pain that comes from that. And obviously we want to save them from it, but we have to do it in a way that is relevant and that is meaningful for them.
And Kelsa, I know your work is motivated by your parents' bankruptcy when you were in middle school, right? Yeah. What kind of an effect did that have on you?
Well, when I was in middle school, my mom actually filed bankruptcy. And I always like to clarify that my mom was a very hard worker, and she had a great job and a social worker for the state of Michigan. And she tried so hard to manage her money correctly and in a really smart way. But she just didn't know how to juggle it. And of course, when I was in middle school, I did not know what bankruptcy meant. But I just remember till this day, I can see her face and just how that affected her. Her self-worth was really low at that time. She was so stressed and her confidence was really low. And what I learned was that money affects our life, whether we want it to or not, and whether that's in a good way or a bad way. It is going to have an impact. It's just the game that we're all forced to play. So when I was a senior in high school, a college recruiter came to my school and said, "What do you want to do when you're older?" And I said, "I want to help people with their money." And he said, "You should become a financial advisor." So I actually practiced as an advisor for 3 years, got my degree in finance and got licensed, and I didn't like it at all. And do we have financial advisors in the room?
Well, that's not a comment on them.
No, absolutely not. I think that it's a wonderful profession. It just, when my mom had a financial advisor, and she's retired now and doing very well in retirement, what she struggled with was not retirement 25 years later or college planning or anything like that. It was the day-to-day part of her money that she just could not get a hold of. It was that timing factor that we all experience.
Cash flow,
yeah. So I left financial advising and I went into corporate finance, and I actually joked that I had a quarter-life crisis. And I thought financial advising was going to be my passion, and when it wasn't, I really didn't know what to do with myself. And I thought, okay, a job is just a job. I'm going to go into corporate America and do my job well, but it's just a job. And what happened was I would just start talking with friends, and people were struggling with money all around me. My employees at work would be stressed at work because of money. And I pretty much said the same thing to everybody. "Why don't you come over after work? I'll see what I can do." And eventually it got to the point where every day after work and then all day on Saturday, my hobby was budgeting. And so eventually I got to the point where I thought, what the hell am I doing all day? I really should just be doing this full time. So that's sort of how Fiscal Fitness was born. And seeing my mom struggle with that part of it, I realized that she's not alone. And it was a need that I felt was not being served. It's really about the nuts and bolts part of money, not the investments and that sort of thing.
So when you're working with someone who is trying to get out of debt, who's trying to repair their credit score, become, credit worthy again, maybe they have certain goals that they've set for themselves, what are some of the pitfalls there? And Dawn, I'll start with you. Have you seen people who have managed to repair their situation somewhat, who are on the right path at least, that then fall back into, a lower credit score and racking up debt again? What are some of the things that people need to watch out for, maybe not right at the beginning of the process, but maybe sort of midway through?
Yeah, I think, I don't see that very often. It does happen once in a while, but then what that tells me is that person wasn't ready, because there has to be a shift in thinking. Some people, will see, oh, I was late on this month, and then a couple lates, and then a couple lates. You can never be late, never, okay? You have to pay your bills on time. It's the biggest impact to your credit that you can make, is to have credit and to pay it, okay? That's the biggest thing. And people will fall into it's just a late. It's not that important. It's not like a foreclosure. Well, guess what? If you have a 780 credit score, you're way up here, you have 130-day late, it will drop your score 100 points, okay? If you have a 680, it'll drop it about 45 to 50 points. And it varies, and it's complicated, the algorithm's complicated, but it will have an impact. And I think that's the biggest thing. They have to be ready to change their mindset. I'm going to pay my bills on time and have good credit. That's the biggest thing.
Angela?
Well, I think that Dawn is exactly right. And, the process of getting out of debt and paying, this is a long process. So you've got to be in it for the long haul. And that's why I go back to the idea of setting goals and setting milestones. And when you hit them, acknowledge it. Say, this is where I am. This is a milestone in my process, and I made it. And take a moment and live in that moment. That doesn't mean go celebrate by making a huge purchase necessarily. Mm-hmm. It just means acknowledge what you did, because that is a big deal. And then use that as motivation to keep you going. And I can't emphasize enough, again, the idea of breaking it up into little bits. When we set goals, one of the reasons why a lot of people don't necessarily follow up on their goals is because we set this huge thing. So if you have a huge amount of debt that you're trying to tackle, yes, you have to know what that amount is. But think of the little steps along the way that you can stop at and say, all right, I made it this far. I've only got this much farther left to go.
Kelsa?
I would say reintroducing credit cards, sort of like what you said, should be a very slow process. Overnight, you would not want to add a car payment, add a credit card, and buy a new house all at the same time. Take on one thing at a time, and when you start to feel comfortable that you're managing that properly, then add the next thing. The other thing I will say is the use of a credit card, when you already know that you're tempted to spend it, like maybe it's just your personality that you are tempted to draw towards that card, the reintroducing that back into your life needs to be a very black and white thing. And what I mean by that is the first thing you should do is put one of those fixed expenses on it every month and go 6 months or a year without ever putting anything else on it. And once you feel comfortable that you are able to do that and live your life without using the credit card, then you can take it to the next step, which is that maybe you go shopping for clothes and you have a clothing fund. You put it on the credit card first and then pay the credit card with the clothing fund. And only when you're able to do that step are you actually able to use it for maybe another expense. But you kind of have to introduce it slowly back into your life just so that you can start to trust yourself again. What ends up happening is you don't accept this idea that credit cards are evil, and you just realize that as long as you're trusting yourself and doing right by them, then they're going to be okay to have back in your life.
Well, and what we advise people is that especially when they've gone through a whole debt issue, is that that credit card is not about using it to buy things. It's about establishing positive credit history. After all the negative, you have to reestablish, because it's the biggest thing after you've had a bankruptcy, for example. The difference I see 2 years after a bankruptcy between someone with a 525 credit score and a 700 is the guy with the 700 got a secure card right the day after the bankruptcy and just started using it to build credit, not to buy things. Again, it's my gas card, okay? Building that positive credit it's huge, you know?
And I think we have to revisit the idea of savings here too, because it gets back to if you haven't built that cushion for yourself, even if it's a little bit, then you end up in a situation where, sure, you may have made progress on your debt, but then you're adding to it again because you don't have the savings that you need to handle some of those extra expenses or things that don't come every month.
I'd like to ask each of you this. Angela, I'll start with you. What financial advice do you wish you could go back in time and give yourself?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Sorry for making you go first.
Yeah,
it's nothing personal.
No, that's okay. I think that learn from mistakes and don't beat yourself up too much. I think that we get in this negative mindset and negative self-feedback cycle where it is important to take responsibility. Absolutely. It is important to say, all right, as of today, I'm not doing that anymore. But I talk to a lot of people who they're like, well, I mean, I'm 50 years old and I'm just not good with money. Like that was the way they were born. This isn't about how you were born or, inherent personality traits. Sure, maybe you like to shop or maybe you have, a personality that's easily tempted by things. That's possible. But if nobody ever taught you these things, then you just need to learn them. And that's it. You learn how to manage it. You learn how to make the decisions that will help you, and stop beating yourself up for the ones that you've already made, because it's not going to help you make progress. Again, I'm not saying don't take responsibility. Did you do it? Sure, you probably put yourself there. But you know what? Now you've recognized it and you've said, I know where I am today, and this is a plan that I am going to put in place starting today to improve upon it. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty amazing thing. That's a gift to yourself. And I think that that's probably the thing that I would say.
Yeah, what I would say is don't be paralyzed. I see so many people that they get into a situation and they feel like they can't dig out. They feel like, and because it will often take years to get into that situation. Well, now, how do I get out? It's going to take me years. No, it's not going to take you years. It's going to take action. You have to do something and, get help, get advice. But you have to take action and not allow, things aren't just going to all go away by, by ignoring it. And it's amazing how quickly, I don't think there's many people out there that within a year that they can't be completely turned around if they are committed to making taking the right steps and making the changes. There's so much you can do. I mean, we see 200 points in credit score. We see, there's a lot that can be done. You have to have guidance maybe, but take action is, I think, the number one thing.
I would say that the goal is not perfection. I kind of wish somebody would have said that. I mean, the goal is that it's okay to make mistakes, but as long as you learn from them, when we have kids inside the home, the goal is that they make mistakes when they're under the safety and security of your roof. And so sometimes if you have a budget in mind and it doesn't go as planned, I feel like money is a very fluid thing. So you might come in under budget in 5 categories and go in over budget in 5. As long as the net effect is that you're ahead, then you're winning. A budget is never meant to be perfect. It really isn't. So if we're coming in under budget on everything, then we probably need to drop a couple of those categories. So just that the goal is not perfection, but it's that you're always making progress.
All right.
Well, and I thought of a better answer for mine too. I got inspired. Right. I was inspired first, so you get to do it. Yeah. This is the other thing that I want to say too. Money is not just about numbers. Money is a mindset. Mm-hmm. And money is emotional, and it is really hard to take the emotion out of it. But that's why it's important to understand, what is my mindset about money? What are my values? If I grew up in a household where there was never enough, maybe my value is I'm only worried about money to meet my immediate needs. And if you can meet your immediate needs, fantastic. But maybe you're not addressing what the future needs to be for you. So we need to identify that. Or maybe I grew up in a household where we were constantly keeping up with the Joneses. And so I operate my life that way because that's what I'm used to. So we just identify that and we say, okay, if this is not getting me the financial results that I want, how do I need to shift those values? Do I want to shift those values? And what are the decisions that I make? And here's the other thing too, is if you're requiring yourself or you're expecting yourself to make decisions that are not in alignment with your values, you're constantly going to be fighting yourself. So that's why it is so important to understand what your values are and what are the things that are influencing your mindset about money.
All right. Well, I have one more question I'd like to ask you, and then we're going to give away the HD radio. So if we can go grab the radio and the stuff ready, have that ready for the drawing. The last thing I'd like to ask you is if you were talking to someone, obviously this is a little bit general because everyone's situation is different, but if you wanted to tell someone a good first step, a good place to start to help themselves get out of debt and repair their finances, where would you advise them to start? Kelsa?
Okay, so if they wanted to get out of debt or repair their finances, what would I have them do?
Where would you have them start?
Okay. I break down expenses into 3 categories, and so I would first have the person just get organized in these 3 categories. The first is the fixed recurring expenses. These are the bills that don't really change. They have a set due date, maybe your utility bills, mortgage. These really don't surprise people, and they don't tend to cause a lot of stress. So these are kind of easy, but you want to make a list of those. A list of all your day-to-day spending. So this is category number 2, your day-to-day spending. This is the food, the groceries, the gas, the eating out, the coffee, all the day-to-day stuff, and you want to try to estimate that. And then your category 3 is all the non-recurring things that we talked about. So, and my goal would be to figure out one new strategy you can employ in each of those to essentially make it just a little simpler, a little bit easier, and a little less stressful every month. So the first one is just making a list of all the due dates and the amount. Well, that's now a little bit more on your radar, so you're not going to forget to pay a bill. Okay, so that's pretty easy. Number 2 is figuring out how much you need for your spending money and then take that amount out in cash. That essentially locks that amount in, and you're not going to accidentally spend more than that. So every pay period, take that amount out of your day-to-day spending. Take half of that out if you get paid every 2 weeks. And then category 3 is we talked about these savings accounts. So essentially locking in those 3 categories, I think, takes the roller coaster ride out and immediately makes people feel way more in control and much less reactionary.
Tom?
Okay, so first I send them to Kelsa for budgeting advice, which I do. But what I look at is I will typically see a credit report because that usually will list all of the debt that this person is dealing with. And there's usually 2 categories of that debt. There's debt that is still positive, so there's no lates, there's no charge-offs, nothing like, okay, it's still with the original creditor, okay, but maybe maxed out. That is very good debt for Kelsa to deal with. So we look at that debt. The other debt we look at is collections. So I will tell you this. In terms of collections, a collection in itself is derogatory, whether you pay it or not. Okay, so you have to be very careful about getting out of debt when it's already in a collection category. Okay, just paying it, the way the FICO algorithm works, often when you pay a debt, it will drop your credit score. Okay, unless you do a pay for delete. You have to try to negotiate payment to get a deletion. That will actually help you.
If you pay it first, you've essentially taken away any bargaining power or power you have in the negotiation.
Exactly. And it's, and many people, they just don't know that is not necessarily and usually not going to help you, at least from a credit score point of view. Will it help you avoid a judgment or summons? Absolutely. So there may be reasons to pay it even if they don't agree to delete. But typically small medical collections, that kind of thing, they're not going to come after you for a summons, and it may not help you to pay that, so you have to be strategic at which ones you pick. And mortgage companies like Ward over here, he can help you kind of target which ones to pay in terms of that.
I would say the first thing is figure out where you are today. If you haven't sat down and not just looked at your budgeting numbers, but looked at your debt numbers, look at your asset numbers, compile all of your information and see where you are today. Because what you're doing is you're creating a roadmap for yourself. You are putting together a plan that is going to take you from point A to point B. And you might have a few pit stops along the way, but essentially you're creating a roadmap for your financial recovery or your financial plan. But in order to do that, you have to know where point A is. And that comes from understanding how much exactly are you spending every month, identifying what the fixed versus variable expenses are, how much debt are you in, what assets do you have that can work in your favor if you have any. And the other thing that I would say is don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that there is a certain level of shame that we place on being in financial distress, and we need to get rid of that. And we ask for help in so many different areas of our lives. And there are people who know more than each and every one of us and are willing to provide that help. Don't take on shame because you are not where you want to be. The great news is once you figure it out, you now are empowered with information to build on. You know where you are today, and you can't figure out how to get to point B if you don't know where you're starting from. So figuring out where you are now and then putting together the plan. And I would say write that plan down. That doesn't mean you're not going to be flexible because things might come up. And so you have to be flexible. You might have a road closure over here, or there might be construction over here on your roadmap to financial recovery. But have a plan in place so that you are working following something.
And that's a good point to do not feel alone in whatever situation you're in. Your coworkers, your family members, you may not talk about it. Everyone has been impacted by the economy and what happened, and there is no shame in that. That is the norm, actually. And facing it, taking control, taking action, that puts you in ahead of any of those other people that are still just not doing that.
I actually say when people come to my office, if it's somebody who says, oh my God, I'm going to be so embarrassed. This is the worst you've ever seen. It never is.
Never.
And then the people who come,
Never.
who come in and say, I'm good with money. I just wanted you to kind of tell me that I'm good with money. It's usually not very good. So if you have a little bit of shame, it's probably nowhere near as bad as you think.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
There's probably lots that we can do to just make it a little bit simpler.
Oh, I'm sure this is the worst credit report you've seen. No.
And you might be surprised that you may help somebody else too, just by sharing where you are and sharing your success along the way. I mean, I already shared that we grew up in a household where there was financial stress, and even after my parents separated, there was financial stress. And I got to see my mother go from, being married to becoming an independent woman who didn't do everything perfect, but she was standing on her own 2 feet. And whereas she never wanted to share those experiences with us, I got to see her do that. And that was a great example. And so if you're hiding it from your family, or if you're worried about your kids knowing, again, remember that as you go through your process of recovery, you could be helping other people along the way.
And being a great role model for them.
All right. Well, thank you so much.